The cellar had collapsed years before she arrived, and the only thing left inside it was cold water that never changed. Mara Keaton knelt in it in February and realized something no one else had. It wasn't cold enough to freeze, but it was cold enough to keep everything alive. The land they gave her sat at the back of the ridge, where the soil thinned into rock, and the wind moved without slowing. 40 acres. Not empty, just avoided. It had been offered the way people offer something they don't want to carry anymore. Not unkindly, not generously, simply forward. Mara took it because it was not nothing. It was almost nothing, which is different. Her husband had been gone 11 months. Long enough for the house to change, not in shape, in temperature. Conversation shorter, rooms quieter, warmth limited. Grief does that. Not loudly, gradually, until the place you are standing no longer belongs to you. So she left it. Not far, just far enough. The back 40 rows behind the main property, a slope of stone and scrub, and one thing no one had used in years. The cellar. Or what was left of it. A depression in the hillside, 8 feet across, lined with broken shale and old stone. The roof had fallen in years before, flattened under its own weight. No one had cleared it. No one had needed to. Because no one had expected anything useful to remain. Mara stepped down into it slowly, boots shifting loose rock, hands brushing the cold stone edges. She saw the water before she heard it. A thin sheet, moving across the floor. Not pooling, not standing, flowing. Clear, steady, uninterrupted. She knelt beside it, set her hand into the current, and felt the cold. Not sharp, not biting. Deep. The kind that doesn't change. That doesn't rise or fall with the air. That simply stays. She held her hand there longer than she meant to, watched the water move past her fingers. Unconcerned. Then she lifted it, drops falling back into the stream, each one catching light before disappearing. She looked around the space again. The broken walls, the collapsed ceiling, the shape of what it had been. A root cellar, built to keep things from freezing. From spoiling. And now, it did something else. Something better. Because the cold wasn't trapped here anymore. It was fed. Constant. Endless. Pulled from somewhere below the frost line, where winter never reached. Mara stood slowly, water dripping from her fingers, eyes fixed on the floor. 44 degrees. She didn't know the number, but she knew the feeling. Cold enough to slow time. Cold enough to hold. Cold enough to keep milk from turning. Butter from softening. Meat from failing. Not freezing. Never freezing. That was the difference. Freezing stops things. This preserved them. She stepped back toward the edge of the cellar. Looked out across the ridge. Dry grass. Stone. Nothing easy. Then back down again. At the water. At the place no one had wanted. It wasn't worthless. They had just been looking at the wrong part of it. Mara climbed out of the cellar slowly. Hands steady on the edge. Boots finding firm ground.
She stood there for a moment, looking down into the hollow, listening to the water move. The decision didn't come all at once. It settled, the way the coal did. She would clear it, not rebuild it the way it had been. Something else. Something that used the water, not fought it. Something that held the cold, instead of trapping it. She turned toward the barn, toward tools, toward work. Because what they had given her wasn't land. It was a problem. And for the first time since she had been left with it, she knew exactly what to do with it.
She started in March, when the ground was soft enough to move, but still cold enough to remind her why she was doing it. The first stones came out by hand. Flat slabs of shale, heavy, layered, brittle at the edges. She lifted them one at a time, set them aside in rows along the slope, not throwing anything away, because even broken stone had a second use. The cellar floor emerged slowly, packed clay beneath the debris, hard, level, intact. It had held, even after the roof had not. The water came from the back wall, from a narrow fracture where stone had split, and something below pushed through. It didn't rush, didn't surge, just flowed, constant, unchanging, enough to matter. Mara followed it with her eyes first, then with a shovel. She cut a shallow channel, 3 inches deep, guiding the water across the floor and out the front, so it would move where she wanted, and not where it chose. That was the first change. Control the path. Everything else followed. She leveled the clay floor with a rake, dragging it smooth, pressing it down with her boots. Flat enough for a jar to sit without shifting. Stable enough to build on. Then she started the walls. Not high, not heavy, just enough to define the space again. Stone stacked against stone, each piece chosen, turned, fit into place. No mortar, only weight, balance, understanding. The walls rose to 4 feet, low, but strong, enough to hold the shape, not enough to collapse again. She did not rebuild the roof the way it had been, not with shale, not with weight pressing down from above. She had seen what that ended in. Instead, she used wood, chestnut poles across the top, laid from side to side, evenly spaced, then cedar shakes, overlapping each other, angled to shed rain. A low roof, 5 feet at its highest point, not built for standing, built for storing. That was the difference. She wasn't building a room. She was building a function. Shelves came next. Flat stone slabs, set on stacked supports. 3 levels on each side. Each one measured. Each one deliberate. The lowest shelf, 18 inches above the floor. Stay dry. The middle, 30 inches. The top, 42. Everything above the water, everything inside the cold. That was the goal. The water ran between the supports, flowing steady from back to front, never touching what she placed above it, but carrying the cold through the entire space, filling it, holding it. She tested it with what she had. A jar of milk, left on the middle shelf. 1 day, 2, 3. Still good, still clean. No sour edge. Butter next. Wrapped, set low. 5 days. Still firm. Still usable. Still holding.
Mara stood in the doorway, watching the air, watching her breath move. It didn't drift out, didn't rise quickly. It stayed, not trapped, contained, balanced. The temperature didn't follow the weather, didn't change with the sun, didn't rise in the afternoon or fall at night. It stayed the same, because the water stayed the same. And the water came from somewhere deeper, where the seasons did not reach. That was the second realization. Not colder, constant. She stood there longer than she meant to, feeling it, understanding it, because this was more than storage, more than a cellar. It was something the ridge didn't have, something the valley needed, even if they didn't know it yet. Mara turned, stepped out into the daylight. The air outside warmer already, the slope quiet, unchanged, except for what sat beneath it now. She looked back once, at the low roof, the stone walls, the hidden cold. Then she went to gather more stone, more wood, more of what the land offered, because the structure was finished, but the idea was just beginning. The first person to notice was not Mara. It was Elsa Byrne. She came up the ridge in early May, carrying 2 buckets that had already begun to turn. Milk doesn't wait in warm weather, not on the ridge, not without ice. By noon, it separates. By evening, it spoils. And what spoils is lost. Elsa had lost enough that spring. Enough to feel it in her voice when she called out from the path. Mara. Not loud, not urgent, tired. Mara stepped out from behind the barn, wiped her hands on her apron, watched the buckets before she looked at the woman. "How long?" she asked. "Since morning." Elsa shifted the weight in her hands. "Already going." She didn't need to say more. They both knew what that meant. Mara nodded once. "Bring it," she said. Elsa hesitated. Not because she didn't trust Mara, but because she didn't understand what she was being asked to trust. Still, she followed. Down the slope, toward the place no one had used. Mara opened the low door, stepped aside, let the cold speak first. Elsa felt it before she saw anything. That steady drop in the air, that quiet shift. She stepped inside slowly, eyes adjusting, hands tightening on the buckets. "What is this?" she asked. Mara didn't answer right away. She took one of the buckets, set it on the middle shelf. Then the second. Careful, balanced. "Leave it," she said. Elsa frowned. "Leave it? It's already turning." Mara nodded. "Then we'll see if it keeps turning." Elsa stood there a moment longer, looking at the shelves, the water moving beneath them, the way the air didn't move. Then she set her hands free, stepped back, and left it. She came back the next morning. Not early, not late. Careful, like someone approaching a thing that might not hold. Mara was already there, waiting, not for Elsa, for the result. They stepped inside together. No words, none needed yet. Elsa lifted the lid from the first bucket, paused, looked again. Then she dipped her fingers in. Slow, testing. She brought them up. Watched the milk fall back. Smooth, no separation, no sour edge. No loss. She checked the second bucket. Then the first again, as if expecting it to change. It didn't. Elsa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Long. Quiet. How long? She asked. Mara tilted her head slightly. Longer than it should. That was enough. More than enough. Elsa didn't thank her. Didn't need to. She lifted the buckets again. Lighter now. Not in weight. In outcome. I'll be back, she said. And she was. 2 days later. Then again. And she wasn't alone. Another woman came with her the third time. Then a man with wrapped meat. Then another. Then more. Not all at once, but steadily. The way need spreads. Mara didn't advertise it. Didn't explain it. She simply opened the door. Showed them where to place things. What shelf to use. What to keep dry. And what to let the air do. They paid in small ways. A little coin. A little food. Sometimes nothing at all. Just the understanding that they would come back. And they did. Because once you saw it, once you felt it, you couldn't pretend it didn't exist. By June, the cellar was no longer empty. Shelves filled and cleared again. Milk, butter, wrapped cuts of meat, jars of cream, all sitting inside the same steady cold. Mara moved through it quietly, not directing, not controlling, just maintaining. Watching the water, watching the air, making sure nothing disrupted the balance. Because that was the danger. Not losing it, changing it. Too much heat, too much movement, too much interference. Any of it could break what made it work. And she had already learned, this wasn't something you forced. It was something you kept. One evening, she stood just outside the door, watching the last light fade across the ridge, listening to the quiet behind her. Voices. Low. Careful. People moving through a space that had not belonged to anyone before. And now, did. Not to one person. To all of them. Mara looked down at her hands. No stain this time. No mark left behind. Just the work. And what it had become. She turned back toward the cellar. Toward the quiet, cold. Toward the thing they had all begun to rely on. And understood, this was no longer just hers. It was something the ridge had been missing. And now could not do without. By July, the ridge began to fail. Not all at once, not in a way you could point to, but in small, quiet losses. Milk that didn't last past midday, butter that softened before it could be sold, meat that turned before it could be cured. Heat does that. Not violently, inevitably. It doesn't destroy everything, just enough. Enough to make a season harder. And harder seasons become empty ones. By the second week, The path to Mara's cellar had changed. Not wider, but more used. Footprints worn into the dirt, wagon tracks cutting shallow lines, a pattern forming where none had been before. They came earlier now, before the heat set in, before the day had a chance to ruin what they carried. Mara noticed it, not in numbers, in weight, more baskets, more wrapped cuts, more urgency in the way things were set down. "Just for a day," one man said, "until I can sell it." Mara nodded. It was always just for a day. Until it wasn't. The shelves filled faster now. Not crowded, but closer. She adjusted without speaking. Moved things apart, kept the air moving. That was the rule, not written, but understood. Nothing touching, nothing blocking the flow, because the cold didn't sit still. It moved. With the water, through the space. If you stopped that, you lost everything. Caleb Rowe came in the third week. He brought more than anyone else had. Wrapped meat, heavy, dense, already warming. He set it down without speaking. Watched Mara instead, waiting for something. "You're late," she said. He nodded. "I know. I pushed it." She stepped forward, unwrapped one piece, checked it, still good. Barely. Close. She moved quickly then. Lower shelf, closest to the water, where the cold was strongest. Not colder, just closer. Caleb watched her work. Silent. Then, "How much?" he asked. Mara didn't look at him. Same as before. He nodded, didn't argue, didn't try to lower it. Because now, he understood the cost of not having it. By August, the cellar was full most days. Not overflowing, but always in use. Things came in early, left later. Sometimes the next day, sometimes longer. Mara kept track without writing. Who brought what, when it came in, when it left. Nothing misplaced, nothing forgotten. Because trust, once broken, would not return. She expanded without rebuilding. That was the difference. No bigger walls, no deeper floor, just more precision, more control, more understanding. She added hooks along the stone, iron, driven carefully into gaps. Not for weight, for space. Meat hung instead of laid down. Air moving around it. Better. Cleaner. Longer. She widened the channel slightly, not deeper, just enough to keep the flow clear. No debris, no standing water. Always moving. That was the system. Not built, maintained. One afternoon, a boy ran up the path, breathing hard, carrying nothing. "Nettie says come quick," he said. "The meat's turning." Mara didn't ask where. She already knew. The lower farms. Too far. Too hot. Too late. She followed him down the ridge. Fast, but not rushed. Because panic wastes time. The meat was already soft at the edges. Heat working through it. Quiet. Invisible. Final. She checked it once. Then spoke. "Wrap it tighter." They did. Hands moving fast. Clumsy. urgent. "Carry it high," she said. "Don't let it rest." They climbed back up together. Slower now, because weight changes everything. By the time they reached the cellar, the air inside felt colder than it had before. Not in truth, in contrast. They moved it straight to the lowest point, near the water, closest to the source. Mara waited, watched, felt the air shift. The meat held, just enough, not lost. Medi sat back on her heels, breathing hard, looking at Mara. "You saved it," she said. Mara shook her head once. "No," she said. "It was still early enough." That was the truth, and it mattered, because this place did not fix everything. It only gave time. And time was what most of them were running out of. By the end of the summer, the ridge had changed. Not in how it looked, in how it worked. There was one place now where things did not spoil. One place where he could not reach. One place that held. Constant. And every path on that ridge eventually led to it. By the time autumn returned, no one called it the collapsed cellar anymore. They called it Mara's cold room, not because she owned it, but because she understood it. The ridge had adjusted, quietly, without saying so out loud. Milk stayed longer. Butter held its shape. Meat made it to market instead of being buried. Small changes, but enough to shift a season. And seasons are what decide whether a place survives. The path to the cellar no longer faded. It deepened, packed by boots, by wheels, by repetition. People came without asking now, without explaining. They knew where to set things, knew which shelf, which space, which place the air moved best. Mara no longer had to guide them. She only watched, adjusted when needed, because the system was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the way things worked now. Winter came again, but this time, it was not the hardest season. The cold outside matched the cold inside. There was no loss to outrun, no spoilage creeping through the day, no urgency in the air, only use. And use is easier to carry than fear. By the second year, people began to ask different questions. Not does it work, but can it hold more? A man from the lower valley came in early spring. Not with food, with paper. He stood at the edge of the slope, looking down at the low roof, listening to the water beneath it. "I'll buy it," he said. Mara didn't answer, didn't look at him. She was watching the flow. "It's worth more than the rest of this land," he continued. "You know that." She nodded once. "I do." He waited, expecting more, an agreement, a number, a shift. It didn't come. "I'm not selling it," she said. He frowned slightly. "Everyone uses it." "Yes, and you could take that value now." Mara turned then, looked at him directly, calm. "I already am." He didn't understand at first, not fully, because he was measuring it one way. Money, ownership, control. Mara had measured it another. Time, use, continuance. He left without arguing, because there was nothing to argue with. The proof was already there. Years passed, slowly, just steadily. The structure held. The water never changed. The cold remained. New families came. Old ones left. But the cellar stayed. It became something you didn't explain. The way you don't explain a well or a road. You just use it. Mara grew older on that ridge. Not apart from it, with it. Her hands changed, marked by work, but steady. She still checked the water, still watched the flow, still listened, because even things that last require attention. One evening, late in the year, she stood at the entrance again. The same place she had stood the first day she found it. The air inside moved past her slowly, cool, constant, unchanged. She stepped in, ran her hand through the water. The same temperature, the same quiet movement, the same answer. She stood there for a moment longer, then turned back toward the light. Because the work had never been about building something new. It had been about seeing what was already there and understanding what it could become. They had given her the worst land on the ridge, the place no one wanted, the place that seemed broken. And in that place, she had found something that did not fail, did not change, did not leave. Some people survive by leaving. Others, by staying long enough to understand. Mara Keaton had done that. And because she did, everything around her learned how to last.